Okay, sorry about that. So today is level 5 of game design. This is our fifth meeting, and this is just going to be some final design considerations for you guys. Um, Before we get into that, just a few EGaDS announcements. We've got classes tomorrow, Friday. We have game night. Next Thursday is general meeting, and then this weekend uh, there is going to be a game jam with Jolly. If you guys haven't heard any information on that or need more information on that, let me know or check out the EGaDS Facebook page. You can find all about that. It's going to be a pretty cool jam. They're providing prototypes for you guys to use, so as a starting off point. So even if you have no coding experience, there's going to be a way for you to immediately start designing aspects of the game. They're going to have tools built for you, so really all you have to do is interact and help create a game. And that game will belong to you. They're not going to be keeping these games. Phoenix?
They discourage not using the
It's
prototypes?
it's completely up to you. They want the prototypes there just so that you can feel comfortable getting started in case you haven't made a game before. It is kind of, yeah, it's kind of like I think you could show up and definitely maybe get your feet wet. I would I would say show up and see what can happen because the people at Jolly are very open. Yeah, at least check out what people are working on. So that's going to be happening starting at 10 a.m. on the 15th. And there's yeah, actually, you know what? You do need to RSVP by Wednesday, I think, at least for food counts and stuff. So
Yeah, he actually filled out quite a bit of stuff.
yeah, I think they're looking for interns as well. It's a new company, um, so yeah, it could be a jolly good time. Okay. Anyway, so I know we haven't talked about level design in here, and I just wanted to, this is a short clip from Indie Game the movie. I'm sure you guys, some of you at least, have seen it, but even if you have, this might be a nice flashback. This is his thoughts on. Why did it go back up? I just adjusted it. Oh, it actually did change, guys. I don't know why, but for some reason it shot back up to like a crazy amount of volume behind my back. All right. All right. I'm gonna try to not destroy you.
Level design. So, the basic formulas of level design go. When you start out, you want to teach the people, you want to teach the player how to play. You need to make sure that they understand every mechanic of the game. So, every level in the first chapter needs to have some example forcing the player to do something in order to beat the level that they need further in the game. So, like there's a level, I think level 3, that just is just a gap. And the only way to get over that gap is to hold down run and jump. You can't get it any other way. You can't just keep jumping around. You won't jump far enough. And that's to make sure that the player understands that in order to get over far gaps, that you need to press and hold the run button and jump across it. It's simple. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's something that usually in games it would just say, hold run to jump far. Most people will just skip the text, and they will forget. Now, just in case somebody didn't play that level, a couple levels later, I reiterate and I give them another section of the level that requires them to run and jump to make sure that they know how to do it because it's important. Like all these mechanics are very important. And each level in the chapter is another level that pushes that. Like there's a level where you need to continuously jump up one wall because there's no other wall to jump to. That's me teaching the player that you can do this. And everybody in the world will see a problem and want to solve it. So if you see something where it's just a wall and you don't realize you can keep jumping up the wall, you're going to try it right away. And once you try it yourself, you taught yourself, not only do you feel smart, like you figured out something yourself, you also now, for sure, know how to do that from then on in the game. So all these levels of introduction they go through everything, and once you've basically cleared out all the things you can do at Meat Boy, then you start introducing new mechanics. And with Meat Boy, it's not like Mario, where lots of the Mario games introduce new mechanics in forms of suits that change Mario's properties. And that's something that I wanted to avoid. I wanted to make it really, really pure. Meat Boy never gets better or gets a power up. It's the levels that change the mechanics. So right away you introduce saws, and they're usually static saws that just spin in place. You have to avoid static saws. Then later, those same saws that you know how that they kill you and they know that they're round, those same saws then will start moving back and forth. So you have moving saws. And then, even later than that, you'll get these saws that are on these little spinners that act like windmills. and they go around in a circle. Now it's the same saw that you've jumped over a million times before, but it's coming at you in a different way. And it's just expanding on the basic mechanic and making it different and more enjoyable each time. As a designer, you want to explore each mechanic and make sure that it can be enjoyed at least 3 or 4 different ways. If it's only got one use and you can only get one use out of it, then it's pointless because you need to be able to juice it. You gotta figure out new ways to use it.
So hopefully you guys can apply some of that at least to platform level design. But I mean, in general, I think that there's something special there about teaching a player how to engage your game. But we're going to switch gears and kind of talk about player interest in games. So last time we talked about writing in games and how you have kind of this narrative structure where as time goes on it gets more kind of exciting and then it winds down. Now this is actually just an interest curve in general, and basically this is a gameplay. This is your gameplay interest. So as your game goes on, it kind of gets more exciting and interesting too, just from a gameplay standpoint. So there are a lot of contexts that this occurs in. So this happens on a level-to-level basis. This happens on a quest-to-quest basis, etc. And basically, this happens throughout the whole game. So there are kind of expectations that people have. When you start off, you're just kind of learning, and maybe there's an initial kind of hook to a mission or a quest, and then it kind of ramps up from there. So even throughout like the whole game, there's kind of this like build-up that happens. And playing with these expectations can be really cool. You can get interesting effects like humor and fear. So it's an important consideration that the player interest kind of has different spikes and peaks, and it's not exactly a smooth curve. But let's talk a little more about what interest is, because I think that's something that deserves some time. And the first is inherent interest. This is kind of the thing that's a little harder to explain, but basically there's kind of an internal drive that we have that pushes us to be more interested in some things than others. Here are some examples in a cat. I think that in general there's just something about certain things that will just appeal more to an individual. So that's the first thing. The second is basically the way things are presented, the poetry of presentation. When something's pretty to look at, it's going to catch your eye. You're going to want to kind of know a little more about it. But you can achieve this in a number of ways, right? You've got writing, music, graphic design, cinematography. You've got ways to engage the aesthetic of a game. And so when you can combine something that's inherently interesting with nice presentation, you're going to get a stronger effect. But the third and probably most important part of interest, especially for games, is projection. So this is the player's ability to see themselves doing what they're doing, what is happening in the game. So I mean, like Laura said, when you were playing her game, you are the main character, and that's the most interesting part, right? I mean, because the things that are happening in the game are kind of either a projection of yourself or even you, maybe, if you're playing a really true RPG, maybe. But so there's like kind of an increasing order of impact. If you think about things that happen in general, right? So things that happen to strangers are like kind of interesting. Like if a stranger, wins like an Xbox 360 up here because Bill Gates decided to come speak and they're giving away Xbox 360s, that'd be pretty cool. If your friend won, that might be a little more cool because maybe then you could use the 360 every once in a while, or maybe an Xbox One. We're living in a different generation of game consoles. But it's really exciting if it happens to you, right? If you win an Xbox One, that's cool. You can go sell it on Craigslist and make quick money and maybe get, I don't know, in some weird exchange. It's a little too shady for you. But anyway, keeping an idea of how close the player is to the experience can help. And also playing with these expectations is another consideration because, you may be able to create interesting emotions in your player when they get jealous of things that are happening or, want to strive to be more in the focus of the game. If you can find a way to take the spotlight off the player and kind of shine it back on them as if the player tries, then that can be interesting. And it's also a really important factor for story as well, because if the player feels like what happens in the story and the things that they do through gameplay affect the story, then there's going to be a little more interest there. So some ways to achieve projection is by character design. You can kind of create these characters that are going to evoke some emotion. So when characters kind of become like friends, that's an really interesting dynamic. And the world doesn't have to be realistic, the world that you create. The important thing about the world is that it's consistent. So if there's ever a moment where the player says, oh, that doesn't make sense in this world, then all of a sudden they're remembering that they're in a game, and it's going to be hard for them to believe in what you're trying to sell them on. So that's another consideration. And that also, player is the main character, and I kind of already touched on this. So these are some considerations when you're thinking about what kind of composes a player's interest in a game. And we're going to talk about playing with others. Multiplayer games have existed for a while, but one of the things that makes playing with others interesting is competition, right? I think playing with other people kind of fulfills this deep desire to kind of figure out your own how you do against other people, like especially like among your friends in your social circle, like kind of seeing where your place is, right? Like especially in, I don't know, I mean, just like if you think about the number of people that play League of Legends with their friends, it's definitely an interesting consideration. And also, I mean, Mario Party is a great example here for competition. But another reason we play with others is collaboration, right? If you're a designer, you want to think about making, if you are creating a multiplayer game, you want to think of actions and ways to play the game that kind of support people working together. And being part of a team is a really interesting concept because it kind of combines this idea of collaborating and competing. So that's why you'll get games that are really fun to play because you're not only on a team, you're also competing against other people who are also on a team. So that's why team-based sports are a lot of fun, esports and just real sports. Meeting up is another factor here. We like to get together with your friends and think about it like this. Food is kind of a way for you to go hang out with friends and just like a reason to be together. And games can do the same thing. Playing like a weekly game of Hearthstone with a buddy can be a good way to kind of keep in touch. Same thing goes, I mean, like with WoW raiding. A lot of people have formed like lifelong friendships just off of like a weekly raiding night in WoW, which is pretty crazy. So the other thing is that it kind of provides a context for you to kind of relate to something that's maybe not attached to any of your real life problems for a little bit. So it's a little lighter fare sometimes, although there's plenty of drama that can be had in games, especially multiplayer games. And the last one here about the last kind of aspect of playing with others in games is exploration. So, when you're talking to a friend, you kind of hear their opinions and their stories, but it's always filtered by by them, by their brain. But when you play games, this kind of pulls back some of the blinds a little bit because you can kind of see how somebody solves problems and how they make decisions under a lot of stress sometimes. So that's kind of more of a peek into their mind and their soul. And in a way that the same kind of applies to ourselves. We explore how we behave in these types of situations, and it's something you want to consider. Like, are you the type of person that crushes your friends all the time, no matter what, or do you let them win when they're having a bad day? Questions like that are kind of at the core of how you perceive yourself. So exploration is a very important aspect of playing with others. And this is a quote from Plato. You can learn more about a man in an hour of play than a year of conversation. So some interesting food for thought when it comes to playing games in general. The next aspect of kind of design considerations I want to talk about is community. This isn't going to be completely applicable unless you're making an MMO, but it's still interesting to think about how communities work in games, especially as a designer. If you ever go off to work for a larger company where you may have to have a community player base, it's something that you need to be aware of. So one of the first kind of facets of community is membership, right? This is why people want to be in the game. It's because they're part of the group. And there are ways as a designer that you can kind of signify this, right? Like, if somebody is a member of this community, do they have like a hat? Do they have a tabard? Do they have a guild tag? There are ways that you can engage that and make it so it's a point of pride or contention for to be on a team, to be on the winning team. Players just identify as being part of a group. And the interesting thing is there's not just communities for players of certain games, right? Like there's like WoW players who like are their own community, or League of Legends players who are their own community, but they're also like like specific like players for these certain types of players for certain games. So it's like, like there's like a Protoss IRC channel, so you could like get in on that if you want. It's just really interesting to see that, you know, being a member is really important. Maybe not for Club Penguin, but another reason why people want to be part of game communities is influence, right? Having power over something, or even more, kind of deadly is not deadly, but tempting, I guess, is having power over someone else. So this is why people, that's why you have team captains, guild leaders. Being a part of a group can play into power dynamics. So how do you create power dynamics in your game if you have kind of a hierarchy?
Would this also apply to player to developer interactions when they're talking about things that they're patching, things like that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you just definitely see it, right? Like if you think about like visiting like forums for a game at all, for a company that decides to engage their players, and most companies have to nowadays. Um, yeah, like I think there are big shots on forums that can kind of like throw their weight around and like say certain things or start certain kind of flaming threads, and people will catch on, and it gets a response, right?
Yeah, like when the Halo 4 was going through patching and things like that, they were trying to say, oh, the pistol should be more powerful. I said yes to that because it's very easy to kill people who are new to the game with it.
So yeah, I mean, being part of a community kind of gives you that affordance of having influence. So there are ways to have influence in and outside of the game. And last, about kind of this whole idea of a community for now is just or at least the definition of a community is something from Amy Jo Kim. She's a game developer and psychologist too. Basically, community is a group of people with a shared interest, purpose, or goal who get to know each other better over time. So that's a short and simple definition of what a community is, and maybe you can kind of keep that in the back of your head in case you ever want to tell somebody what a community is. Now we're going to talk about how to kind of build a community or foster a community, at least through game design. The first is to give ways for players to foster friendships, right? Some way to talk to each other inside or outside the game. I mean, I think for us, if we're going to create a game that's any kind of multiplayer, bless you, it's going to be local multiplayer, right? You're going to play maybe on the same computer or like something like that. So the thing is, as a designer, you can still craft that type of communication. You can find ways for the players to maybe introduce themselves. How are players going to break the ice when they play your game? Even if it's on the same keyboard, there might be a way for them to interact with each other that's interesting. So thinking about that, good to know. You need to keep conflict at the core of your game if you want to have communities around it. So to that end, there are kind of two types of conflict. One is conflict that makes players demonstrate, that one is better than the other, and another is a conflict that needs to be resolved from people working together. So in that sense, there's conflict against players and there's conflict against games. And games that build community usually rely on both of these. A good example here is like a collectible card game like Magic the Gathering. So Magic the Gathering might be a game that you could just play to be better than everyone else, but because the strategies are so complex, you actually have to end up sharing and discussing strategies to get better and to understand the game. So that's a really good way to keep conflict at the core, is by having a bit of more complexity to the game. And you'll see that's a pretty common thread among games that have big communities. They're a little complex, right? Although I guess you can still have more simple games with communities that are more based on kind of a friend social network. So there's two ways of looking at that. Another is player expression. And this isn't limited to online games. This is actually one of a really important consideration. I think that it's super achievable in any game that you make. And that's just kind of giving, a player like kind of a choice, even if it's like an artificial choice that has no effect on the core gameplay. It can make the player feel really special, like it's their experience. Like, for example, like if you have an RPG and like there's only really one choice the player has in the game, is to choose like a red sword or a blue sword, and they go through the whole game and that's it. There's no other impact besides the fact that they see a blue sword on the screen or a red sword on another screen. That can be extremely powerful as to like what that experience means to the player. So it's something you want to keep in mind. I mean, customizing, it's simple, but it's something that if you decide to take the time to do, players will notice. So Another thing is that there are kind of like three levels of players. There are the noobs who basically get really overwhelmed in game communities. They're just challenged by learning to play the game rather than like playing the game itself, if that makes sense. They're still just kind of learning how to acquire information. And then you've got regulars. So regulars are kind of the most common type of players you'll see in most games because, you know, most people will play games at least to the point they can understand it. They're mostly trying to figure out how to master the game, and this is the group that we'll see the most. Um, and then lastly, you've got kind of veterans who these are players who normally don't stick around after they finish the game. Like if you think about like a very like kind of linear RPG. Like you play it once, and you might kind of just hang up your hat and say, "All right, I'm good. I'm not going to play it anymore." But if you can make a game that has reason for players to come back, if you have a meta game, basically a game that exists outside of the game, then that can be fun as well, like rankings or like content that you continue to roll out. So it's just important to kind of remember that there are kind of like different types of players based on their experience. Another way to foster community is to make players depend on each other. So this is pretty straightforward. This is kind of a combination of competition, challenge, and collaboration. You can have a specific content that accommodates players who want to play solo. But if you want to make a community-based game, or if you want to have a strong community in your game, then you want to make sure to have situations that require communication and interaction for players to have and feel kind of a community value. The other is an obligation to others. Now, this is like kind of an interesting tangent from the Shell book. In parts of like Aboriginal Australia, giving a gift unexpectedly is actually considered really rude because it creates a burden to give a return gift. So, creating moments like that for players to make promises to each other or to give gifts in general is really powerful. And that can be kind of a fun way. I know I've gifted friends items in games before, or like, go visit somebody's town in Animal Crossing and you go, drop off like a bunch of fruit, or maybe you might prank them, but, it's fun to have ways for players to, be nice and be together. So communities based around games have been around for a long time, longer than like these digital games, right? Like pretty much as long as professional sports have been around, these communities have existed. But with the internet, we're seeing new types of communities, right? We're seeing there were MUDs, Neopets, and WoW. It's like kind of a walk down memory lane for someone. I'm not sure who that is, but new play. So players who create their online identities are going to retain them for their whole lives, right? Like I'm sure you guys already kind of remember some of your alter egos from maybe from Neopets or from another online game, and maybe you're still using that username, right? So it's kind of an exciting time to figure out how game communities will find a place, not just in the context of games, but also kind of in human culture, because I think you're already seeing kind of this idea of online identities kind of crossing over into the real world, like with professional esports players, stuff like that. They're referred to as like their in-game name rather than their actual name. So that's a really interesting and kind of a changing thing of this identity in games, and we'll just have to see what happens with that. We're going to switch over to how games transform players. And we may have to, I don't know, it's 7:58, and I've got like 12 more slides, but I don't want to like rush through them. Could we finish this? Ricky, I saw him passing by. I think he went to go grab some water. This might be a good stopping point, though. Could we finish this next time? It would be like maybe a 10-minute lecture. But it kind of had like kind of some closing thoughts for the class, and I don't want to rush through it. So, all right. Thank you a lot, guys. We're finished for the day. Woo! I hope no one has any like ear damage. I'm so sorry. It's because this thing is so like obnoxious. It like basically what happened was when I unplugged the HDMI and plugged it back in, it reset the volume down there, but I didn't know. So it resets the volume every time.